George Michael is one of the most talented songwriters and performers of his generation. Throughout his 25-year career, he has been the driving force behind one of the biggest bands of the 1980s. He has sold over 80 million albums as a solo performer and gathered numerous awards along the way. However, controversy and scandal have often threatened to overshadow his musical achievements. No more so than on the afternoon of the 7th of April, 1998, when he was arrested in the Will Rogers Memorial Park in Beverly Hills and almost lost everything.
Nothing to lose.
Leads you to where you are today.
I believe in storytelling.
It's gonna make you a star.
I'm still trying to figure that out.
Beverly Hills police officers arrested the singer known as George Michaels. Mr. Michaels was arrested for a violation of 647A of the Penal Code, engaging in a lewd act.
In a way, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. What I was embarrassed by was the kind of stupidity of it. And then it took me a long while to realize it wasn't just plain stupidity. There was an undercurrent of real self-destruction there. And it takes a long time to admit to yourself that you've kicked your own quite hard, you know. But all very, very good learning stuff, and very much, and as I've said many times since, being publicly humiliated does have its advantages, because it kind of, there aren't many things more embarrassing than that.
George Michael's musical journey began in far from glamorous surroundings. He was christened Georgios Peniatou and started life in a tiny flat above a shop in the North London suburb of Finchley.
My mother and father had a fish and chip shop, and I think by the time I was about 1.5, we'd done better. We were living above the laundrette then. When I was very young, my mother and father were struggling quite badly. By the time I was, I guess, 12 or 13, I lived in a nice big house out in the suburbs, but my very early life was right bang in the centre of North London.
George's father, Jack, had arrived from the Greek island of Cyprus just 10 years earlier, full of dreams and ambition, but completely penniless. He found a job in a local restaurant and was soon working 7 days a week to support his growing family.
I never took anything for granted, and my father was incredibly tight with his money, so I certainly never, even when we got into the nice big house, I still had to work for everything, which is really, really a good place to start, I think.
George's family was not musical, but a gift of some records kick-started his interest.
I was given 3 45s, and one of them was Tom Jones singing Delilah. One of them, and the other 2 were the Supremes. And one of those 2 records had a big, was broken, so I had a big bit missing. So I used to lift up the stylus and put it down on the other side of the record, let it turn around and go like that. That was how I learned the record. But yeah, my Supremes, and I've always said you must be very influenced by music that you hear when you're very young, because I ended up somewhere in between the Supremes and Tom Jones anyway, didn't I, really?
He said to me that he felt that he had been born out of time, that he should have been an artist in the 70s during the singer-songwriter era.
Not content with just listening to music, it wasn't long before George tried his hand at writing.
The writing has been a constant thing since I was a child. The believing I was going to be a pop star didn't happen until a bit later, I suppose. The Music Maker of the World, yes, that was my very first song. And I do remember the melody and the lyrics, but I shan't be giving them to you right now. I played drums on the pillows in my mate's house, and he played the guitar. But it was actually quite catchy.
At his local comprehensive school, George met Andrew Ridgeley. This confident classmate provided a new focus for the budding singer.
I often wonder if I had not bumped into Andrew, you know, how different my life would have been, because he was determined he was going to be famous. I think he would have been just as happy to be a footballer, but he was determined to be famous. And at the end of our school days, as it were, 5 years later, it was him that encouraged me to start a band as early as we did, you know.
And that band was called The Executive.
Absolutely dreadful dreadful school band. We had one little amplifier that we all used to plug into, and the rehearsal would last as long as the amp didn't smoke, and then the amp would start to smoke because we had two microphones, a bass guitar and a rhythm guitar stuck into this tiny little amp, and it would literally just start to smoke.
The Executive came out of sort of ska. They were rather stylized. They were sort of cheap man's Duran Duran in a way. They were new romantics. I think, you know, it's just as well that they didn't make it as the Executive, because it allowed them to come up with something that was a lot more authentic.
The Executive failed to ignite any interest from the record industry and promptly disbanded. But George and Andrew were not to be put off and immediately started working as a duo, taking the name Wham! It wasn't long before they caught the attention of Mark Dean at Intervision Records, who encouraged them to sign a contract.
The signing of the Intervision contract was one mostly of naivety. In a Greasy Spoon cafe in North London, the boys met Mark Dean, who insisted they must sign the contract there and then, otherwise it won't happen. They signed it. It was, with hindsight, one of the most ludicrous contracts you could ever imagine. If they were ever to make any money out of it, it would be a minor miracle.
The original deal with Intervision Records, we got, I think it was 1.5p a single, and 12 inches we got nothing at all. And of course we were selling 50% 12 inches, I would imagine, at the time.
The first mention of George Michael in my life was by Mark Dean, who ran this little label called Intervision, and he said, "I've signed an act that you're going to love, and they're going to be huge, and they're called Wham!" And I said, "They're called Wham!" He said, "Yes, they're called Wham!"
They were starting to get noticed on the UK music scene, but what was it about Wham! That made them stand out from the competition?
I think, to be honest with you, great songs and, you know, a formula that we didn't realise we had. You know, these two young boys doing this kind of Butch Cassidy and Sundance thing, but in a very kind of camp way. And I think there was something about the fact that it was very obvious that our relationship as friends was real. There was some kind of chemistry between us that we absolutely hadn't counted on, you know. But the world seemed to see pretty quickly.
I think the Wham sound of the day was modern because it was different. It just sounded fresh and new, and if you were, you know, 30-odd, which I was then, it sounded young. It made you feel old, which in a way is exactly what pop music always should do.
There was something catchy about them, these two guys, and, you know, the style they had and the mullets and everything else. I thought it was pretty cool.
By the start of the 1980s, George Michael's band Wham! Had secured a record contract and were gathering a small army of